Welcome to another episode of Inquiring Minds. I'm Steve Harper. With me, as always, is my amazing co-host, Donna Karlin. Donna, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing really well, thank you.
Fantastic. What are we talking about today?
So, successful people. That's who we're talking about today.
Oh, wait, you might need to get somebody else in as a co-host.
That's a triple hockey puck statement.
Yeah, I figured.
So successful people, they have like a laundry list of things that are so-called wrong with them. They have mental health issues. They have bad habits. They have things they don't know or gaps in their knowledge. They have imposter syndrome, which is a whole other conversation, and weird routines, weird for them, but they know they're all perfectly normal, at least for them. So they don't fight them. They just live and navigate with them. And that's what makes all the difference. It's those that fight all these things that actually wear, if they have any kind of mental illness issues or imposter syndrome or a bad habit, and they fight it rather than say it's part of me and it's part of a greater me. And I'm still going to lead in spite of it, with it, all of that. And I wonder how many people are so hyper-focused on what's so-called wrong with them or not as great as they would like it to be about them, rather than say, this is me with all my idiosyncrasies, and I'm going to just plow forward and lead with all of it. Yeah. So I wanted to have that conversation because we pick on what's wrong with us. We don't take into consideration all of us and all of who we are.
Sure. Well, this whole, concept kind of reminds me of a conversation or an interview I saw that was in conversation with Rafa Nadal, the tennis player.
Yep.
So he has some peculiar habits that he does when he's playing. A couple I won't go into here because they're a little bit gross, but one in particular is when he sits at the chairs in between the changeovers, he sets his bottles out in a particular order. And it's kind of an OCD thing, right? It's one of the things he did as a small child. And every time he did it, he seemed to find success. And so it became a habit and it became, this peculiar thing that people picked up and noticed. Well, the funny thing is that, it used to make him very insecure, but he realized when he didn't do it that way, he used that as more of a centering approach to get himself focused in the moment, just finished a game, high tense point or whatever. And when he goes back to the chair, he arranges the way that, the bottles the way he wants them. And it got so annoying at one point that Novak Djokovic went by one time and just knocked the bottles over with his racket as he went to his chair. And it completely unhinged, Nadal, because he's like, why did you do it? Why did you touch it? And what was funny was they started going back and showing all the different opponents he'd had over the years where somebody intentionally bumps into the bottle, knocks it down, or somebody, gets really close or walks right through it. And what they were doing was trying to get into his head about this weird, peculiar behavior. But really what it was him getting in their head, because they were more focused on trying to get him off of his game in between games than ever focusing on just playing the game that needed to be played, right? So they were more obsessed with trying to, cause this, bring attention to or get him off his game by doing, something to knock him off of this habit. And they were interviewing him and they said, well, does that bother you? And he said, nope. When they do it now, I know I got them. I have them. And he said, in the early days, it really did bother me. My dad and, his coach used to criticize him for doing it. And he said, what he realized was that activity, as peculiar as it is something he needs to do to center himself in the moment. And when he's centered in the moment, he competes at the highest level that he can possibly compete at. And I just thought it was phenomenal because you see that people do certain things a certain way. They drive to the office a certain way. I have this weird thing about, when I'm driving, if I get through this light, it's going to be a great day, before that other car coming, or, if I can step over that one crack in the sidewalk, there's these weird things that people do. And what's, I think, really interesting is that you sort of have to kind of embrace those things. You don't necessarily have to apologize as long as they're not hurting anybody else, not causing harm to anybody. Clearly there's limits, but at the end of the day, some of those things that make you peculiar and strange are actually some of your strongest strengths, because they're allowing you to do things the way you need them done in order to achieve the results you're looking for. So I don't know. The minute you offered up this as a topic, I was thinking immediately about Rafa Nadal and his bottle habit, I guess you could
Yeah,
say.
it's so funny because, I'm an observational coach. That's part of the work I do, not all the work I do, obviously. And pre-COVID or the olden days, whichever way you want to look at it, I was always in my clients' offices with them as they did their work, observing them, the context within which they work, their teams, the dynamics. It was incredible. I remember talking about the habits of the people that I worked with. I could predict what they were going to do to the nth degree, which drove them
Mm-hmm.
crazy. I'll give you a short example. I was working in a minister's office. It was like the Secretary of State, actually, I guess it would be the equivalent
Uh-huh.
in the United States. And I was there at 7 o'clock in the morning because I knew it was going to be a busy day. I wanted some quiet space before everyone would start showing up. One by one, they started walking in much earlier than I thought they were going to walk in. They looked like they hadn't slept a wink all night. So the first thing that occurred to me was, what happened? Second thing, which was the bombing. I don't know if you remember the bombing of the subway in London.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing that happened was watching how they came in, which told me exactly who the minister called first, second, third, and fourth,
Yeah.
which is telling me who's the most critical to her in the order that she called for them to come in and do what they needed to get done. That was really quite amazing. Then I was watching how they got their work areas ready to hit the floor running. All these habits were unbelievable. And the chief of staff was a riot because the minute the minister would call, it was instinctive. He would pop up and start pacing as he was on the phone, actually having a discussion about the hot issues and what had to happen. And I looked down at the carpet. It was threadbare around his desk because he would pace every single time. And he had no idea he did that.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I said to him, are you going to replace your carpet? And he said to me, he looks down, he goes, when did
Wow.
that happen? I said, every phone call, when the boss calls, you're up and you're pacing. He said, I had no idea. Everyone on the staff thought it was because he was a nervous wreck because the boss was calling. And no, this was his way of hitting the floor running, literally, and getting his energy up so that he could, run off and do what had to get done. And I'm looking at this, and there are all kinds of these idiosyncrasies that leaders have.
Yeah.
And it serves them. It actually fuels them doing work in the way, or being in the way that they show up to the world. So my question to our listeners and to you, Mr. Harper, here is, how often are you aware of some of these habits and idiosyncrasies and depressive points and all of that kind of thing? A, try to hide it. B, try to override it. C, maybe be embarrassed by it. So you're so busy, like your Nadal story, you're so busy fighting what's an innate part of you rather than harnessing it to just elevate yourself in every way, shape, and form.
Well, you didn't say D, all of the above, which would have been my answer. But I do think that there are some things that, I've caught myself doing that I wish I could change. I call them tells, right? If you're thinking about poker, they become, especially in negotiation or high tense conversations, they become a way for you to, if people are paying attention, for a way to really leverage that situation to a better outcome for them in some cases. I'm always struggled with high tense conversations, especially if I had to reprimand someone or had to fire someone. They could tell it was coming because I had this particular way that I rubbed the back of my head. And it's like, oh shoot, this is not going to
That's
go
it.
well.
Well, there you
Right.
go.
And I kind of wish from time to time that I, could avoid that, because I would often, really, I became very insecure about it. But at the end of the day, what I actually realized was I was doing that in such a way that allowed me to think, to center myself, and means that I'm going to have, what I'm going to say next has power. What I say next, is important. And really, I am reminding myself to use my head first before I just spew whatever I'm going to say. Maybe I should do that more for this show. I'm not sure.
No,
but at
that
the
would be
but
so
at the
much
end of the
fun.
day, I actually realized that that was something I shouldn't shy away from. That it was something that I should embrace. It is a peculiarity, and it's a weird little nuance, but leaning into it now to the point that I recognize it as it's a calming it's a calming effect for me before I have to have a very difficult conversation. Before we recorded this morning, I had to have one of those conversations about a situation that's happening with my software company. And I recognize that without it, I am not centered. I'm not focused. And like Nadal with the bottles, it has become a strength that I work towards. And I've read countless, books on Einstein and Howard Hughes and Richard Branson. They all have very specific things that they do around, how they were coming up with great ideas, how they were negotiating a big deal, how they were interacting before they went on, camera. I think everybody has something. And I think that, again, I kind of just default back to, if it's not harming anybody and it helps you, it can't be that bad a thing to really embrace. And it's actually kind of fun to think, maybe if you haven't been paying attention, because this topic's never been put on your plate for discussion before, what are your things that, that you're doing? And are they good things? Like in the case of, whether you're bluffing in a poker game, maybe it's not good to have that tell.
Yeah,
But it's good to know the good and the bad of it, so that you can figure out, when do I dust it off and put it into practice, and when might I want to hold off and not do it, depending on what the circumstances are.
that's it. That's a great conversation to have at the dinner table, or lunch at work, whatever it is. Like, do I have any tells? It would be really fascinating for people even to see their facial expression when you ask the question.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know what else occurs to me? How much of this is lost in our virtual work environment?
That is a great question. I actually don't think much, believe it or not. I think if you actually pay attention to people on a Zoom call, or, in a virtual meeting, you can see, I in fact actually just did a presentation on this, that, you need to tell your face you're participating in a meeting.
Yeah, that's a good
Because
point.
I think what's funny is, because we feel like we are separated by this wall, right? They call it the third wall or the fourth wall, depending on who you talk to in, media, that we get unconsciously comfortable with our environment and having this conversation. So if you are in a Zoom meeting and somebody's presenting something or talking, and they have the floor, so to speak, how many people do very awkward things that they're not really paying attention. So the one way that I have centered myself to not do that is I stare at myself a lot during camera, not because I'm in love with myself, but because I don't want to dig in my ear or pick my nose or do something that, just unconsciously weird, and all, you wouldn't want to be on, video to do it. But really, at the end of the day, to remind yourself that you need to be paying attention to the person that's speaking, the person that's presenting, the conversation that's happening. And the only way that you do that in absence of face-to-face interaction is to show up as if you were having that face-to-face interaction, even though you're separated by a digital call. And I think that's really critical. And I feel like most people don't spend enough time focusing on that. And it becomes difficult for people to really feel like, hey, I'm getting buy-in, or people are understanding what I'm presenting, and or whether you're really contemplating a decision, or you're really thinking about what you're going to go. You got to go. You heard the dryer go off, and you got to go
Yeah.
get the laundry done, right? So I think I think in that environment, it becomes even more critical, and understand what your tells are. And I'm sure if anybody went back and looked at all of the different episodes we've had, we both have them, right? And some good, some bad, but at the end of the day, they are what make you who you are. And I think if you can utilize some laser focus to turn that from a disadvantage into an advantage in some capacity, or overcome something that
Right.
might be working against you,
Hmm.
then you're so much better for it.
Yeah. No, this is an interesting one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
lots
sure.
to think about. Yeah, for sure. I really look forward to our listeners to see what they come up with and whether or not they're willing and daring enough to share their idiosyncrasies and their weird habits and things that make them so uniquely wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love to hear this as well, because I do think there are going to be some folks out there that didn't ever think about this that'll be like, well, what are mine? Maybe I need to pay attention. And that alone is actually a really good thing. Do you have them? What are they? Are you willing to share them? Do you find them to be a strength or a weakness? Do you find it to be an advantage or a disadvantage? Love to hear what those are. I have a laundry list of mine that I can share. So you have to go first, audience, to share yours. But I can
Yeah.
certainly I will pile on with mine. I guarantee you I have more than a few. So, but this is, I love this because I think it'll give people some perspective and give them an opportunity to really kind of dig a little bit deeper and look at their own ways of interacting out there in the world, whether it be virtually or in person. So, Donna, how can people share their idiosyncrasies or these unique, I had a gnat in front of me that I'm not having an episode.
Okay, just checking.
Anyway, how can they get involved and share this conversation or share their thoughts on this conversation?
Join our Facebook group, Inquiring Minds with Donna, Karlin, and Steve Harper, and share your thoughts, your humor, your insights, how you've had conversations with your family and friends, and what you'd like us to talk about if there's topics that we haven't covered yet. Because we love hearing from you guys, and we really do
Yep.
listen to your suggestions. So join us, make yourself welcome, and let us know a little bit about you. And we look forward to continuing the conversations.
Absolutely. Well, Donna, another great conversation in the books. I'm so grateful for these every week. They are the highlight of my week. So thank you for showing up every week to have them with me. And we'll be back again with another episode of Inquiring Minds very soon. But until then, take care.
You too. Have a good one.